pressing matter in Rome.
Alex Bernier has a gift for solving the mysteries of the beyond.
My little brother was murdered. They brought Alex in to consult.
But a pattern of bizarre deaths.
Do you know what these are?
Birthmark.
It's not a birthmark.
Has led him to a conspiracy.
What are those?
It's the language of Christ. Blood in, blood out. It was a ceremony.
In a place no one would expect.
What do you know about the order?
What are you talking about?
Rogue priest outside the jurisdiction of the church.
I assume that the two of you plan to seek them out.
Now he must battle a secret order.
Alex, what are you thinking?
It was murder. I've seen the marks on the body myself.
There will be no inquiry.
That is using a supernatural killer
I'm afraid.
You should be.
to take absolute control of an empire.
There are some things worse than death.
You must stop this investigation immediately.
Walk away, Alex.
Something terrible is gonna happen.
Where is he?
It's a setup.
Get as far away from here as you can.
Say goodbye, Alex. What's going on here?
What's going on here?
The Order.
I won't stop until I find the truth.
The Jesuits run the world, not the Jews. The G in the center of the Masonic symbol stands for General, the Jesuit General, according to Nicholas de Bonneville's book, Jesuits Against Freemasonry.
We read Bode Johann Joachim Christoph. This concerns Freemasonry. Born in Brunswick, 18th of January, 1730, one of the most distinguished Masons of his time. In 1757, he established himself at Hamburg as a bookseller and was initiated in the Masonic order. To Masonic literature, he made many valuable contributions. Among others, he translated from the French Nicolas de Bonneville's celebrated work entitled Les Jésuites chasses de la Maconnaire et leur poignard brisé par les Macons, which contains a comparison of Scottish Masonry with the Templarism of the 14th century. In 1790, he joined, by the way, de Bonneville was a Jesuit. In 1790, he joined the Order of the Illuminati, obtaining the highest degree in a second class, and at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad, 1782, he had advocated the opinions of Weishaupt. No man of his day was better versed than he in the history of Freemasonry, or possessed a more valuable and extensive library. No one was more diligent in increasing his stock of Masonic knowledge, or more anxious to avail himself of the rarest sources of learning. This is Bode, B-O-D-E, Johann Joachim Christoph. Hence, he has always held an exalted position among the Masonic scholars of Germany. The theory which he had conceived on the origin of Freemasonry, a theory, and I had carefully declared to be untenable, quote unquote, by Masonic coadjutor Mackey, whom Mackey also wrote the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, was that the order was invented by the Jesuits. Here's this top Freemason in Europe, in Germany, who states the Scottish Rite Freemasonry was invented by the Jesuits. You got that, David Icke? Don't talk to me about Scottish Rite Freemasonry being the largest Masonic body in the world without telling me that the Jesuits created it from the 4th degree to the 33rd degree. But you see, you can't talk about this in alternative method, in alternative news circles. You can't talk about this in the conspiratorial press now. You can't say these kinds of things. You can't blame the Jesuits for it. Oh no, because we got to keep this rip-off continuing so that people never know who really is controlling the world.
Jews.
Isn't that right, Alex Jones? With your father-in-law, Edmund Lowe Nichols, being a Knight of Malta. Isn't that right, Alex? You don't say my name on your broadcast, but I'll say yours on mine. How about that? You too, Tex Mars. Was that the order was invented by the Jesuits in the 17th century as an instrument for the reestablishment of the Roman Church in England, covering it for their own purposes under the mantle of temporalism. And they would do the same thing here, because a Freemason, a 32nd degree Freemason by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, an Episcopalian Protestant, would be used by the Jesuits to impose militaristic military government on March 9th, 1933 in this country, aided by the Knights of Columbus and the Jesuits and the Bonesmen, because that was the purpose of Scottish Rite Freemasonry anyway, to restore the supremacy of the Church of Rome in historic white Protestant nations. As was done in England, Great Britain, so it was done here. We read another quote here. Nicolas de Bonneville, a historian and literature born in Efferix in France, March 13, 1760. He was the author of a work published in 1788 titled The Jesuits, divided into two parts. Of the first, which was the subtitle, was, and gives that. His Masonic theory was that the Jesuits had introduced into the symbolic degrees the history of the life and death of the Templars, and the doctrine of vengeance for the political and religious crime of their destruction, and that they had imposed upon four of the higher degrees the four vows of their congregation, the Society of Jesus. Who said this? Albert G. Mackey, 33rd degree, 1917, American Masonic historian, Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Now here's an excellent quote. We read, quote, "The higher I went into the Jesuit order, the more corruption I saw within the institution. I was invited to attend a secret black mass by high-ranking Jesuits, including Superior General Pedro Rupe, in a monastery in the northern part of Spain. When I knelt to kiss the ring of the high official, I saw a symbol on that ring that made my blood run cold. There was a Masonic symbol, the compass in the square. A thing I hated, and I had been told to fight against it. I found out the Jesuit general was also a Mason and a member of the Communist Party in Spain. The Black Pope controlling communism and papal fascism." Who wrote this? Alberto Rivera, 1979, Spanish-American ex-Jesuit, in his work, published by Chick Publications, titled Alberto. And he was a Jesuit, and his testimony was true.
I work in dealing with the infiltration of churches and religious institutions as well as government.
Jesuit general's a Mason. Here's another quote. Same page, 320. Out of my book, Vatican Assassins. Quote, "There are still old ladies, male and female, about the country who will tell you with grim gravity that if you trace up Masonry through all its orders till you come to the grand tip-top head Mason of the world, you will discover that the dread individual and the chief of the Society of Jesus are one and the same person." Who said this? James Parton, 1855, American historian. In The Life of Horace Greeley, I remember the day I found this quote in Franklin and Marshall Library up on the 3rd floor, and when I found it, I nearly fell over and fainted. You see, these people have known this for years, for over a century, but we were never told. You cannot know this. You cannot know the Masonic Lodge, the Scottish Rite and York Rite for that matter, are nothing but agents at the top for the Jesuit order to restore Romanism and the rule of the Jesuits and the supremacy of Romanism in this country. You can't know that. And if you Masons don't believe it, you're in denial and you're deceiving yourselves. And so all the power that you have, your economic power, being heads of certain big banks, and being in academia, and being the head in political matters throughout the country, you are willingly ignorant of the fact that you're being used to restore and to maintain now the supremacy of the Roman Brotherhood, the Roman hierarchy in this country, as overseen and directed by the Jesuit provincials in this country and the Jesuit assistant in Rome. So this is fair warning to you. You know now who runs Scottish Rite Freemasonry, and you have an obligation before God to get out and to tell the truth. And the other thing you want to remember is Satan's evil angels. There's 4 degrees of them: thrones, principalities, powers, and dominions. So Loyola would copy that. So there's 4 different degrees of the Jesuit order: 4 professed vows, 4 in the Knights of Columbus, and 4 in York Rite Freemasonry. Jefferson, as you know, was a deist, but he was also involved with the Grand Orient Lodge of France, which was Jacobin. And the Grand Orient Lodge of Paris, France was completely controlled by the Jesuits. It had become Illuminized. And we must always keep our distinction between Freemasonry, low-level American Freemasonry at that time, and Illuminized Freemasonry. Okay. Freemasonry was formally revived in 1717 in England. England became the Grandmother Lodge. It is a fact that the purpose for the formal revival of Freemasonry was to restore the Roman Catholic Stuarts to the throne of England, because it had been driven out in 1688, the Glorious Revolution of 1688. William and Mary come take the throne in 1689, set forth the Bill of Rights, of which comes our Bill of Rights, from which comes that. And so the Jesuits were foiled at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690 when William III fought with the armies of Louis XIV and King James II. And Louis XIV and King James II were absolute and total Jesuits in their heart, souls, and kingship. They even called themselves Jesuits. And Louis XIV had, I believe, nearly a 60-year reign in France. He began his reign, I think, at the age of 14. And Hollywood depicts him as a great king in one of DiCaprio's movies, The Man Behind the Mask. It goes on to say Louis XIV became one of the greatest kings of France. He was a vicious, adulterous, murderous traitor, killed out the Huguenots. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685 drove them out, totally destroyed the productive capacity of France. He destroyed the best of his population. Louis XIV was wicked. And so the Jesuits, in using Freemasonry, they revived it in England in 1717 for the purpose of using certain Protestant rulers and leaders to bring them into the Masonic Lodge, camouflaged as something virtuous. And but unbeknownst to many of them, it would be used as an engine for papal restoration in England. Well, in 1754, the Jesuits at their College of Clermont in Paris, France, wrote the first 25 degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. And I have that quoted in my book. I have the source. It's a Masonic quiz book, Ask Me Another Brother, written by the Masons. So the Jesuits were the authors of the first 25 degrees of the Scottish Rite, and even Madame Blavatsky will tell you in Isis Unveiled that the Jesuits are the true authors of every rite of Freemasonry. And she would know because she was a Jesuitess and a co-Mason. So we have the revival of Freemasonry in 1717 and the Jesuits seeking to use it as an engine for papal restoration. But what happens is God sends the first Great Awakening in the 1735-1740 era with the preaching of Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. And shortly thereafter, you have the first great Masonic schism in about 1750. And this divides the Masonic Lodge from the Continental to the English. And the English Masons and the American Freemasons ceased to be an engine of conspiracy for the Jesuits because it broke away. This is why, to a certain degree, I support Leo Zagami. If he wants to have a Masonic schism, I say praise God and let's get it on. Divide the Masonic camp. So even though he may still be working for high-level Freemasonry, maybe even he's a Jesuit agent, I don't know, but I'm for him causing Masonic schism, because if it wasn't for the Masonic schism, you would have not had the suppression of the Jesuits in 1773 by the Pope, or their expulsion from Portugal, Spain, and France, all done by Freemasons of those countries. So I advocate a Masonic schism. And so at the time of the Revolutionary War, when it started in 1775, we're in the midst. We had a Great Awakening. The Great Awakening caused a great nationalism to arise. The result of the Great Awakening was our armies were filled by white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, Presbyterians, and Baptists to fight this war of tyranny against King George III. And George was a total tool of the Jesuit order. King George III took in the Jesuits when they were suppressed and kicked out of all the Roman Catholic countries in Europe. When the Pope suppressed them in 1773, King George takes them in after one of his ministers had a secret council with Jesuit General Ritchie. So England becomes the dumping ground of all the European Jesuits. And so they then implement their tyrannical, their Council of Trent in attempting to destroy Protestantism in the colonies by afflicting the colonists. The Navigation Acts and so on. You can only use English shippers. Under Cromwell, the colonies could use any shippers they wanted. We had true freedom of commerce under Cromwell, as when we had colonies. Not with King George III, you could only use English shippers. And they jacked the price up and made it impossible to make a profit, just like they're doing to us now. No matter what you do in your business enterprise, you cannot make a profit now. And so they were doing the same thing to the colonies. Well, the English Freemasons and the American Freemasons were working together. They were anti-King George III, anti-Pope, and so they were involved in the Boston Tea Party and involved in some of the great movements that led to the American Revolution. But the Revolution was Protestant. It was based upon Protestant principles. It was carried out by a white Protestant population. There were 3 million people in the colonies, only 30,000 Roman Catholics and 24 priests. The rest were all white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. We had, I think, 500,000 black slaves at the time. I think that's what Blake says in his History of Slavery and the Slave Trade that was written in 1860. But the white population was Protestant. And we were driven here by the Inquisitions of Europe. Every city in Europe had an auto da fe. It had a fire burning heretics regularly on a daily basis. And so we fled after 200 years of persecution. And God gave us this place. That's why Squanto was on the shore when the pilgrims arrived, and he speaks English. And he helps them, and he saves their very lives. Because God was saving his church, a remnant of his church, giving them a place to worship him according to his word, the Bible, the Reformation Bible, the AV 1611, and the Geneva Bible, which came essentially from the same underlying Greek text. The Reformation Bible, which we call it. So we have the English and the American Freemasons separated from Grand Orient Freemasonry on the continent, which includes not only the Grand Orient Lodge of Paris, it's going to include Frederick the Great.